All right, so this is the Town of Fairfield's Affordable Housing Committee special meeting of Tuesday, July 20th. It is 7:04 p.m. We have with us committee chairperson Steve Grathwall, committee members Nancy Lyons, Heather Dabrowski, and Carrie Mackover, and we have Glenn Chowder joining us from Planometrics, as well as Carla Miklos from Operation Hope. Mark Barnhart, Director of Community Economic Development, acting as your host and MC. And we also have other members of the public. I see Herb Limecooler, Catherine Giff, and I believe Serenity Bishop is on the line as well. So without further ado, Steve, I'll turn things over to you for your remarks.
Thank you, Mark. And let me ask you a question, Mark. Usually we say in the format that only the members of the committee are allowed to ask questions and respond. Others can send in text or emails and stuff. Does that hold true with the Zoom, or can anybody? Because I'm happy to let anybody ask a question. So.
Well, I think that's at your discretion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
So I don't.
Fine.
I think with larger groups, it's sometimes difficult to manage the process. But with a small enough group here, I think we can open it up if you wish to other people.
And so I do wish. So if folks have questions, please raise the hand either electronically or actually, so that we know that you wanted to ask a question. And
you can also throw it in the chat too, and then we recognize it.
Yes. Let me say a welcome to Carla, and thank you, Carla, for joining us, for Glenn, our consultant, and to members of the public, Catherine and Herb and Serenity. Welcome. And with that, we'll go to the first action is to approve the minutes from last month.
I will move that the minutes be approved as presented.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Thank you, Nancy. Any comments, questions? Then hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Any abstentions? The minutes are approved. And then with that, I'll turn the floor over to Glenn, and he can give us an update on the affordable housing plan update. Thank you, Glenn.
Wonderful. Is it okay with everybody if I share my screen?
I think I already gave you permission, anticipating your request.
There you go. All right. So what I put up on the screen is the booklet, which are the results of the housing survey, as you recall. We prepared and administered a survey using SurveyMonkey for about 6 weeks or so to see what we would get in terms of responses and input. The responses came in, there are 1,167 responses received. And I've summarized the results in this booklet. And so what I'd like to do tonight is just sort of go through the booklet, talk about the different questions, the nature of the responses that we got, et cetera, and just have a discussion. I see on the agenda that we've budgeted 45 minutes. I don't know if we're going to take that long, but I think kind of going through the survey and the nature of the responses will be helpful for us in our efforts. So the first question that was there a question there? No? So the first question we asked people is how long they had lived in Fairfield, and 61% of the respondents indicated that they had lived here for more than 20 years. I did some quick math. That is roughly double what the population is when you look at survey information, et cetera. So I think keep track in the back of your mind about there are an abundance of people who have lived here for more than 20 years. And as a result, the other categories are roughly let's say a half to 60 or 7, about 2/3 of the native population here overall. We asked people whether or not they owned or rented their current residence, and 90% owned, 9% rent. And that is a little bit higher than what the base population is, but I think again, it reflects the fact of people who've lived here for more than 20 years. We asked people, I'm actually going to blow this up so that everybody can see it more closely. So here we go for a sec here. Probably too much. Let's try that. So the next question we asked people was their neighborhood of residence. Because there were so many neighborhoods, it's hard to really get an overall sense of how representative this is of the population as a whole. But clearly there were some neighborhoods that there was more interest and activity than in others. Since these don't neatly align with oh, I see. I clicked on something on my screen. I'm sorry here. Not sure how to align these with census tracts or block groups. So I can't tell you how representative this is of the community. But again, this is what people reported here overall in terms of their neighborhoods and areas.
So Glenn, just a question on that. So if 22% were from Stratfield, excuse me, and Mark, and I don't know if you have a sense, do 22% of the town's residents live in Stratfield? You know, is it
I
aligned
think
that way?
that was what Glenn was trying to make, and no, that is not accurate. I
Yeah,
mean, Stratfield's overrepresented as far as survey response. And part of that is due to the fact that there's a very active neighborhood association there that was able to push out the message and probably encourage a lot of their members to respond to the survey. So
Good.
that doesn't hold true in other neighborhoods in town where there may be a neighborhood association, but perhaps not as well organized or as active.
Thank you.
I did find a map online of these different neighborhoods. So for people who may not be familiar with some of these neighborhoods, again, this map was just intended to provide a basic overview of town in terms of where these neighborhoods are. The next questions that we asked is we asked people where had they lived or what type of housing unit had they lived in at any time in the past. And since there were multiple responses permitted, you can see from this column here that it does not add to 100%, but it does show the fact that there was quite a bit of diversity in terms of where people had lived in the past. We asked people where they lived today, and 85% of them indicated that they lived in a single family home. And that's not too dissimilar from the overall housing distribution of Fairfield here overall. I think the thing that's often useful about this question is it helps people realize that they've lived in a lot of different types of places in the past, and they can call on that experience when they start to get a chance to answer some of the questions that are going to follow. We asked people for those different types of housing types, where they had lived in the past or where they may live at the present. Did they think that Fairfield had too little, too much, or just about the right amount of such housing? And generally, people felt that things were just about right for the single family and the townhouse types. And then certainly as we got into bigger projects or bigger buildings or more families per parcel, there was not tended to be more of an indication that there was too much housing. There's a couple of different ways that you can read this. Roughly a third of the respondents felt that maybe there was too little single-family attached houses, and almost half of the respondents were clearly not fond of multi-unit buildings and felt that perhaps there was too much of them. And that may give us some indication overall of the types of development patterns that people are perhaps more comfortable with in terms of housing diversity, or what their perception would be about the overall impact on the character of the community overall. Then asked people what they felt Fairfield's greatest housing needs were. The categories that people were most supportive of were housing options for older persons and households. There also support for younger people and families. And then the level of support dropped off somewhat significantly when the question was posed with regard to lower income service workers or lower income people and families. And I think that's perhaps an indication of some concern on the part of people in the survey or respondents and participants in the survey about that housing being undefined at this point in time in terms of what that might be or what that could be. I think this represents an area for us in terms of further work as part of the preparation of the Affordable Housing Plan. Question 8 was all about housing strategies in terms of things that we might consider in Fairfield to address housing issues and provide housing options and housing diversity. One of the questions was helping the Housing Authority find ways to build more units to address the needs of lower income elderly and disabled persons. And almost 2/3, 63%, were either somewhat or strongly agree with helping the Housing Authority to address the needs of lower income elderly and disabled persons. When the question was asked about helping the Housing Authority find ways to build more units to address the needs of lower income families, there was no clear consensus either agreeing or disagreeing with that statement. Yes, the more people agreed with it than disagreed. But I think in a survey of this type, it's important to recognize that the margin of error around these responses is probably large and somewhat fuzzy. So it's hard to say that there is strong support for this, given the nature of the responses we received. But I think when you have a scenario, for example, in question A up above, where there's 3 times the number of people or 2.5 times the number of people who are agreeing versus disagreeing, there's a stronger indication. Questions C and D really kind of related to areas where different types of housing might be considered, might be proposed. Question C was, should Fairfield seek to guide new types of housing to areas where water and sewer services are available? And this would be, again, areas which might have infrastructure to support different uses or densities. And 56% thought that agreed with that statement. 21% somewhat or strongly disagreed with that statement. Question D asked about supporting additional housing in transit-oriented locations, either near train stations or on bus routes. 60% agreed with that statement. And 31% disagreed with that statement. Another question about Fairfield should support mixed-use buildings along main travel corridors with ground floor business uses and residential uses above. 2/3 roughly agreed with that statement. About 1/4 disagreed with that statement. And again, the circles here are just sort of meant to give a general sense of where the results are probably far enough apart that we can have a sense of which way those go. The question F is an interesting one. We asked the question, or made the statement, Fairfield should consider allowing detached accessory dwelling units in more larger lot single-family areas than the just the 2-acre zones we're allowed today. And there's no clear consensus. It was 45% to 36%, with 19% not sure. As you're perhaps familiar or aware, the legislature passed a public act which dictates that communities shall allow accessory dwelling units as of 2023, January 2023, unless they opt out That is an affirmative act on the part of the town, and it requires 2 votes, one from the legislative body and then another one from the Planning and Zoning Commission. So this is an area that we, the Affordable Housing Commission, may want to focus on in terms of that particular decision moving ahead. Question D was Fairfield should allow existing single-family homes to be converted into 2 families. And there was strong disagreement on this. 57% disagreed with that statement. 29% thought that that might be a statement that they would agree with. And then the question was asked whether Fairfield should continue efforts to guide the design of multifamily housing in Fairfield. 54% agreed and 33% disagreed with that statement. So those are the questions that we asked, the responses that we got. We also asked an open-ended question about, are there other strategies related to housing options and choices that you feel that Fairfield should consider? There were 334 responses, and I grouped those in the back, and we can touch on that in just a little bit. So then in terms of demographics, the demographics of town, the predominant category was 35 to 54-year-olds. I would say that's kind of an indication that social media took hold and distributed the survey, as Mark had indicated, either within neighborhoods, et cetera. Oftentimes, older persons are not as savvy on social media or aren't as wired in terms of that method of communication. So that could have been a factor in the distribution and the response rate in the survey. 60% of the responses, 59%, excuse me, were female, 33% were male, 8% preferred not to answer. So again, predominantly a female response. In terms of race or ethnicity, 70% white or Caucasian, 23% prefer not to answer. And the base, I think, in the population, according to the American Community Survey, is that Fairfield is 84% Caucasian. So this, how we interpret that 23%, it's kind of hard to say overall. In terms of household size, we've got a distribution of different household sizes. 48%, roughly half of the housing units or people who responded lived in 1 or 2 person households. And that's not uncommon these days in terms of the number of people who are living alone or living with a partner. So it is, in fact, somewhat representative and reflective of the community. We asked people information about household income. There's quite a distribution of household incomes, but many of the respondents earn $200,000 or more per year or fell into the category of no response. They preferred not to answer. This can be a sensitive question on the part of participants in surveys of this type. We asked people whether or not they considered themselves to be cost burdened, spending more than 30% of their income on rent, mortgage, utilities, real estate taxes, condo fees, et cetera. And 62% of the people indicated that they did consider themselves to be cost burdened. And that's an important statistic, I think, overall. And I think something to keep in mind with regard to some of the other responses. People may be feeling cost burdened, but they're still not particularly interested in some types of housing options.
So this is Heather. Can I just interrupt really quickly and comment on this? So this one particular thing, I actually, when I was reading and when I was doing the survey, I cracked up because I know more than one family who are all about keeping with the Joneses, and they're, you know, excuse me, I'm coughing on air, and keeping up with the Joneses, and they're paying interest only because they want the big house and they want this a specific neighborhood, and they're doing it to themselves because of show. So I think when we analyze this one particular area, we have to keep that into effect, because cost burden means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And yes, there is definitely the school teacher and the police officer and the fireman, but then there's also a certain sector group who are all about keeping up with the Joneses and go bigger than they should on purpose.
And I think that's one of the things we're probably going to want to talk about as part of our work, Heather, in the sense that cost burden means different things to different people. If you're earning above the median income, if you're earning $200,000, then yeah, that's a lot of money to spend, but it doesn't create necessary hardship in other parts of your life. But if you're earning at 80% of the median income or below, and you're cost burdened, then perhaps you're having to make hard choices. So I think that's an excellent point, and I think something we
agree.
should keep in mind as we go forward.
All right, thank you. Like I said, I just, it always kills me when I before this and they're like, oh, we're just paying interest only for the next 5 years. I'm like, what? You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
because a lot of people are about, they have to have the right car and the right address and the right, whatever. So anyhow, I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry.
No, Heather, thank you very much. Question 17 was again, other thoughts that we asked people to share with us overall. And so these are grouped in the next section of the report. The headings were sort of general headings to try to capture the flavor of the comments. But from page 11 to 44, there's 30-something pages worth of comments under some of these different categories. I'm not going to read them. I'm not even going to try to summarize them or try to count the number of statements or anything else. But this information is available, and hopefully you'll have a chance to read through it, because I think it gives you a sense of some of the thoughts or feelings from people overall and some of the things that they cared about. So with that, I think I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for thoughts or feelings from the committee in terms of your thoughts on the survey and where we go from here.
Well, first, Glenn, let me ask if, can you summarize what are your overall thoughts about this? Because you've seen the survey in many different communities. So
I think there's a clear indication that the phraseology sometimes about affordable housing concerns and alarms people. I think that they're perhaps concerned that it might be a scenario that they've seen in other communities and other places, and they're afraid what that might mean. I also think from the comments, there's some reactions and responses to some of the more recent projects that have been built, and people are feel, particularly longer term residents, that may not be in character with their vision or their feeling about Fairfield overall. So I think that it's an interesting observation for us, and a way for us to approach how we're going to present recommendations that the committee feels comfortable with to address some of these issues and concerns head on.
one other question about that then, Glenn. I mean, you, again, have done a survey in many different communities, and are the responses that we got in the town of Fairfield dramatically different than in Stratford or other communities you might have done a survey in, or is it actually fairly typical?
Every community is a little bit different. I think that the fears and concerns that some people expressed are typical for what you do see in surveys like this. Over the past year, there's been quite a lot of press about housing related issues. There's some things proposed at the legislature that might have had significant impacts on home rule and other things. So I think people's on edge, concerned, if you will, about those. And I think some of that is being expressed in the survey. People love Fairfield. It comes across clearly in the survey. And there's concern that, you know, there may be negative impacts or implications or things that they're concerned or alarmed about. So I think the results are similar to results I've seen in other communities. And I think the lesson for us is how we move forward and how we characterize this information.
Thank you.
So let me just jump in real quick. Herb, I think I saw your question about IP addresses. I did an IP address check on this. Turns out there was one person who put in multiple responses. The good news is it was Mark Barnhart's office, because they received 20-something surveys that were mailed in. And so they had permission, if you will, over the course of a day after the survey had closed to others to go ahead and get those in. I think there were 42 other situations where there were 2 surveys from the same IP address, and that's generally the same device. So it's a computer in the household. But I went through them and found that there were differences in the responses. So it very much could have been a husband and wife or a father and daughter or something like that that happened. So I didn't have any reason to suspect that there was anybody who was trying to stuff the ballot box. So I felt comfortable and left everybody in terms of the responses. So I tried to be very careful about that. And I'm comfortable that with 1,167 responses, we didn't have any monkey business going on in terms of survey responses and results or anything like that.
Just so the committee knows, I did, as part of the outreach, contact, among others, the senior center, as well as the Fairfield Housing Authority. And the Housing Authority specifically asked if they could have residents who wanted to respond to the survey do so in writing. So I sent them a printed copy so that they could fill it out and mail it back to me at their convenience. And we did get about 24 printed and mailed responses by the close of the survey. Then I had an intern enter all the data.
Yes. I just want to show just for a second here, I'm going to share a screen again. Apologize for this because it's not very user friendly, but I've created for Mark's use here an Excel spreadsheet, which is formatted as what's called a table, which allows us to look at this information and look at all of the individual responses. And Herb, over here on the left-hand side, you'll see here on the screen that we have the IP address
Terrific.
column for it. And there's also this column here of IP check. So for example, if I sort all of these by their IP address, when there's a 1 that comes up here, see that? In this cell, I guess I should zoom in a little bit, but bear with me for a second. This 1 in the cell means there's 2 IP addresses, but they've lived in town 1 5 to 9, 1 10 to 14. So it could be, you know, a parent with a kid that moved back from college or somebody who rents or in the house, et cetera. So there is the ability, again, to go through and compare this data and also to be able to do crosstabs. It's laborious is all I can say. You can pick all men between the ages of 25 and 34 who live in Stratfield and say, well, did they feel more strongly than the population as a whole about this issue and do that. So I created this as a permanent record, if you will, that could be mined for a lot of different purposes going forward.
Right.
I think Gerb's interested in doing that analysis.
Well, he's just got to get you to release the data, Mark. That's all.
I might just do that. I'll have him as a consultant.
There you go. Well, I think I've played around with the data already because there were some questions here again about the length of residency stuff. I ran a couple of quick looks through and I didn't see significant differences in some of the response categories. In terms of, I just picked questions randomly and said, was there a significant difference on these? I didn't see it. And I consider significant to be, 5 or 10 percentage points away from what the average was, because that means the other population, the one that you're excluding, is 5 or 10% the other way. So it was clearly unscientific, Herb, and Mark and everybody. But again, the information is there and it's possible to play with it and see if there's anything significant that jumps out.
I mean, it seems like it really would lend itself to pivot table analysis, Glenn, and really,
And Herb, I haven't done a lot of that. So if I think it's something that you've got more experience in, I tend to look at the data holistically as in the community personality and where the community's head is at. And I think Steve brought up an interesting point that, if the survey is dominated by people who've lived in town for more than 20 years and are Caucasian and mostly female, Is that really reflective of the entire community? And no, it's not. I mean, I think there are some differences. So that means that there's ways that we could normalize the data to get a better understanding of areas. It's possible that might be fruitful ground for us.
That's great.
Glenn, did we do a survey in 2014 that was comparable, or was it
We
just
did
public
not, Carrie,
hearings?
no.
Yeah.
We
So-
had the ability to, some of these questions were done in a workshop setting.
Yeah,
We had the ability to meet in person. We had a fairly good turnout where we went through some of these same exercises in person as part of a facilitated workshop.
And the nice thing about,
Hopefully we'll get back to that as we get into the fall.
Mhm.
And be able to, I think, to have a more in-depth conversation, particularly about strategies that we might employ to add to our housing diversity.
yep. I thought those workshops in 2014 were very helpful and very effective because we gave people the responsibility, if you will, for coming up with strategies and reporting out to the room as a whole.
yeah.
And that brought a little bit of sort of moderation, on some of the responses, and people I felt were supportive and helpful.
Well, I would think, yeah, we will be doing some public outreach at some point as
We
we,
will.
yeah, so that will be an opportunity for that to happen again, I would think.
Yep, I would hope so too. I think that just so that the committee can have a sense of next steps, if you will, in the process. I think my sense overall on the workflow here is that our next meeting, I think, is only 3 weeks away. Is that right, Mark? Is about the second Wednesday of the month or whatever.
Yeah, typically the second Wednesday. We sometimes have difficulty in mustering quorums in August, but we'll see
Yep.
how things go.
And we should talk about that. If the commission, the committee wants to take a little bit of time off, we can certainly do that. The next major deliverable for me is to prepare for the committee review or analysis or audit of the POCD and the zoning regulations in terms of impediments and incentives, if you will, to housing strategies. And that can also provide information for us in terms of areas we may want to explore further. And then following that, I think we would confirm our overall goal statement. And then I would prepare a sort of package of alternate strategies in different areas that communities around the state are considering with regard to housing and affordable housing. And then we can talk about which of these may have applicability to Fairfield. So for example,
As you do that, are you going to be considering the implications of 6107?
I think, is that the Public Act, Carrie?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure, because there were so many bills this year, I
know.
couldn't keep track of them all, that I refer to as Public Act 21-29, which is what it finally became.
Okay.
So yes,
That one.
I think for other communities, for example, I'm working with, I share with them and say, well, Fairfield adopted, has a housing trust fund, and you should consider doing a similar types of thing. So I'll share with you what other communities are doing or considering,
Yeah,
and what we may consider going forward. And I think the implications, I think, for Fairfield, there are two areas in that Public Act, in that bill, where the town gets to opt out. And one opt-out provision is with regard to accessory apartments. There's certain provisions you can opt out on that one. And the other opt-out provision is related to parking requirements for residential usage. You cannot require more than one parking space for a studio or one-bedroom unit, and more than 2 parking spaces for any other type of unit. And the challenge we can sometimes have is that even in a 1-bedroom unit, there can be 2 cars. And so 1 parking space and 2 cars means the cars are going to go someplace. And so the question is, how serious an issue might this be? And what should Fairfield's approach be? And I think the Affordable Housing Committee could weigh in on some of those issues or elements.
okay.
So that's what I see taking us through August into September. And then I think at that point in time, with that discussion, we'd have the parameters to start putting a document together, a framework that we could then discuss amongst ourselves and road test with others to see whether or not it sets an appropriate direction for Fairfield moving ahead.
So we may want to try to schedule something perhaps even in late August to give Glenn some time to put together that next piece of the puzzle, that analysis that he's doing with regard to our zoning and POCD, if that even if that works in terms of your time schedule. And that way we have, you know, some, we're not leaving that, and we have some additional work that would then guide us into the fall as we start to really ramp up our community engagement and outreach efforts to try to, again, hopefully at that point, we'll be able to have some in-person workshops when we start talking about strategies and things of that nature.
So I think, Mark, I'm on track for the August meeting with
Okay.
my workflow. So if the committee is comfortable meeting then, I will be ready then.
Okay,
If on the other hand, the committee says, you know what, August, I would like to take a little bit of a breather here and pick back up in September, I'm happy to do that as well. So it's really the committee's choice how you'd like to proceed.
No planned breathers in August.
oh, you just came back from vacation, Steve. Some of us haven't yet gone. So, but I don't want to speak for the entire committee, but I know that we, as you get closer to the start of the school year, people come back into town. So, you know, that is in late August, but we'll figure out when it works for a majority of the committee. Maybe we'll do another doodle poll and figure out when people can make it.
You know what's weird is that I keep thinking of potential hurricanes and how that's going to interrupt us. And this is not far from my mind, and I'm sure others too right now. That, you know, we already had that 6 inches of rain here a couple of weeks ago. And what's coming down the road that's going to require us to postpone things
Mhm.
because we have no power or no whatever we have.
The other thing that that we need to consider, and I think you raised it, Carrie, obviously we want to make available this information in terms of the survey response to the general public and publicize it so that people can also wrap their head around and
Yeah, that's true.
look into it a little bit further. And we do have that story map website, although we just have right now the framework.
Mhm.
And we really need to fill in the content piece, and this is a component of it. And as we develop additional work products, that will be posted there as well. So I think that would be another thing that we should take the time between now and, you know, September 1 to fill in some of that content to help educate and inform, and also provide, you know, some of the information that Glenn has gathered to date and the committee has already reviewed,
Good.
and make sure that that's up and available for the public to view and discern.
Glenn, the 30 pages of extended comments at the end,
Yep.
did you find anything new, intriguing, novel in the comments?
I thought, again, there are some people who reacted sort of viscerally, I think, and the comments were essentially somewhat negative. I thought there were some other comments with regard to locations or types of housing that people felt might work well in Fairfield. And so I did find some elements in there that I think I was pleased to see, because I think, again, that when you ask people for other strategies or other thoughts, some people, you know, the survey, the questions were tricky, or, you know, they're just kind of reacting. But people who actually transition to and say, you know, you might want to think about these types of things, I found those to be useful. And I think those might be situations that we could build on. I also think that depending on how the report comes together, we can take some of these quotes out and actually use quotes in the plan to
Mhm.
identify things that residents of Fairfield have said to us. And exactly which ones those will be, we're just not clear yet, but I think that's a possibility.
There are a lot of comments about pocket neighborhoods. I don't know where that came from.
Yeah, who made those, right?
Yeah, check those IP addresses.
Well, since, yeah, who knows their IP address, right?
Right.
So one other thought that I had about a number of the people who responded had lived in town 20 years or more. And the two things I thought about in that regard is, first, they've been here long enough to see changes. They've seen the town change from 2000 to 2020. But also they've lived through maybe their own household change from being a young family to being an empty nester. And I'm not sure how either one of those play out into the overall responses, but that's all, just an observation.
No, I think that's true, Steve. I think anybody who's lived in a community over decades has seen changes, and they've affected different parts of the state differently. And people can be nostalgic. Sometimes in the planning world, we call it sort of the drawbridge situation, that people move into a community and they don't want it to change from the way that captured their heart and wallet the first time. That's their image of the community, and communities never stay that way. I was very impressed when I worked with Fairfield on the 2014 plan to go back and see the 1988 housing plan that was put together back before this was even recognized around the state to be an issue. And you start looking at some of the information in that report and realizing what Fairfield was like in 1988 versus what it's like today. And I think I came across a graph the other day that showed the growth in housing prices in an area, geographic area, compared to the change in income. And the issue of housing affordability has not gotten any easier. It's grown significantly over that time period. So it's interesting sometimes what people hang on to is the important things. And these are people who have housing in the community today. They're not experiencing some of the stress that others have. So again, just I think things for us to keep in mind as we move ahead.
And Glenn, as we do move ahead with this, are there particular things that you would like the committee to do for you? Are there analyses that we can do for you? Over the next 4 to 6 weeks, can you say do X, Y, and Z?
I think I view my work today in the near future is to prepare, collect information to share with the committee so that you're familiar with census data, the opinions here of the community, the audit, I guess I'll call it, of the POCD and the zoning regulations in terms of things that as somebody who's coming into this as an outsider, jump off the page at me and things we may want to be talking about in the future. And then I think my role is going to be to provide a framework for these types of issues and support the committee as we go forward and evaluate which strategies might be most relevant, effective, appropriate for Fairfield. So I would say continue to read and review the information as it comes forward. If you have questions, please bring them up. And I think by the time we get to September, we're going to be ready now to start to apply the things that we've learned and use this information to think about policies and strategies for Fairfield. So I think that be prepared for the fall, I guess is the best way to put it.
Thank you.
It'll be a busy time.
Yes.
Mark, has any of the information been shared with like planning and zoning or the Board of Selectmen, first Selectwoman?
No, not yet. And again, I think in terms of the survey, wanted to review it with the committee, but now we'll start to disseminate it outward and make it available for the public. In addition to the other work that Glenn's put together, I've kept staff at zoning aware of where we are, but again, they're focused on some other things at the moment themselves. So I think now we're starting to get into the meat of our work, and we'll expect to have more collaboration with those various other groups.
Would ask that we make things available to the selectmen, selectwomen, RTM and planning and zoning, so that they hear it from us and not from the street.
Yep.
Okay.
If I may, Steve, so the booklet I put together here is marked draft.
Yeah.
The reason it was marked draft was in case the committee had any sort of questions, issues with this. I would propose for Mark, if he wants, to take the watermark off that says draft, and also the header on the pages that says for discussion purposes from the Affordable Housing Committee. I did have one community that said, the survey comments, the 30 pages worth of commentary, that can be available at Town Hall for people who want to come in and see it, but we're not going to publish that.
Yeah.
So I throw this out to you. I think it's quite appropriate, if you will, now that the committee's had a chance to talk about this, to take the draft off. And I can share that back with you, Mark, and at that point in time, or we can leave draft on if that's the committee's preference. Whatever guidance you'd like to give me, I'm all ears.
So I have no preference either way on draft or not draft. The information is not changing. So either way, I'll leave that up to Mark.
Yeah, my inclination was to keep it draft only for our purposes tonight, and then after we've had a chance to discuss it, ask Glenn to remove the watermark and the header, and then disseminate it. The only reason I would not disseminate all the comments is simply for space. I would make that available if people want to go through it and read it, but I don't,
Yeah.
it's just a question of reproduction cost and that more so than anything else. But I probably will share it electronically, and people can review it at their, decide if they want to print it out, that's fine. We'll obviously post it on the website. We'd like to get it up to the new Storybook website at some point. But again, we need to do a little work ourselves to fill in some of the content, so it's just not sitting up there by itself without some context in terms of the broader effort. So,
Mark, would you like me to break this into 3 PDFs? In other words, booklet number 3, and then we have appendix A and B?
sure, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important for the comments to be there for people to see it if they want to, in the interest of transparency, and they'll either download it and look at it. I sent mine to Kindle so I could read it there. And it's you should know those things. People should see that. And there's some good ideas and some not. There's some good ideas, and there's some ideas that's like, yeah, but I think it's all part of what people want to see. So.
Yep, I will take care of that.
But Mark and Glenn and Carrie, if this drill down analysis, using pivot tables, for example, would indicate that there is the opportunity for normalization of the survey results that would meaningfully affect how we might interpret, the responses. Is that useful to have sooner rather than later? And how does that affect the timing of when you might deliver the results to the first select woman and also, post the results?
My inclination would be to send out the information as soon as possible, so I wouldn't necessarily wait to do a further analysis. I think there's going to be some folks, such as yourself or some others, that want to examine the results more carefully, more thoroughly, do a more thorough analysis to discern any differences in terms of the responses from geographic areas or gender, or whatever the case may be. I didn't have Glenn go into that level of detail because I wasn't sure it was, you could slice and dice this information a lot of different ways, and it can be quite time consuming. So I didn't want to take up his time or our budget to do that,
Right.
But we certainly could do that level of analysis, and I'm happy to share the table with you, Herb, and we can kind of go through that together if you'd like.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
that
I'm-
would help.
Herb, I'm very interested too, if there are things that come out of that kind of analysis. The only thing I would caution the committee with is I think we have to remember that we have a margin of error around all of these responses. The margin of error is an important concept. The margin of error essentially means that, and Herb, you're probably familiar with this, that the answer is within a certain number of percentage points of what the population as a whole might feel. So when we start to slice and dice, we actually are reducing the population size or the
No
sample
question.
size, and the margin of error is increasing. So I think it's very helpful because I think what Herb is talking about allows us to see tendencies. And as long as we understand that these are tendencies, it's possible that people who've lived here longer would tend to feel blank, and people who have not lived here as long would tend to feel blank. Okay, that's great. And that will help us. But I think, hanging our hats on a particular percentage is probably a dangerous avenue. But tendencies are useful information, and might even provide insight and light bulb moments for people and say, you know what, you're right. Okay, I understand why I feel this way. So I would say green light, and we'll see what the results come back with.
I have one other question. Is the town's POCD going to inform our POC, well, or not our POCD, but which comes first? Are we writing our part that goes into theirs, or are they writing our part, their part, which has to get incorporated into whatever we do?
I suspect will be finished first, and we were asked to look at housing needs, which is an element of the POCD.
Okay, yeah,
And so I would imagine that it would be the case where we'll be informing the POCD update.
good,
But it's important as a benchmark to start with an analysis of our current POCD,
right.
as dated as it may be, to look at the land use policies and see how they might be different under certain circumstances. So I think that's what, and more to the point, to the level of zoning analysis that Glenn was mentioning.
And
Yeah, and I think
I have one last question. Are we going to be considering having to do anything with climate change? Is this going to affect the beach areas community at all in this document, or are we just going to leave that to the bigger document?
I think, Carrie, that my sense is that properly falls, or probably properly falls, more into a POCD area. I think
Okay.
our issues would be, how can we diversify housing choices? Some towns talk about diversifying their housing portfolio.
Yeah, we talk about
And
that.
we should provide strategies and recommendations to help the community do that. The question could be, if there are areas which are subject to environmental risk or contain other things, those may not be fertile areas. But I think if we were to try to tell planning and zoning what to do in terms of the zoning map, that probably the utility of our report would wane in their eyes. So I think
Right.
the issue would be, we can perhaps talk about strategies and better areas, et cetera, and let them figure it out from there.
Well put. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is Heather. What about the impact on our wildlife? It's becoming more and more, I don't know, the lines are getting really blurred. I mean, there are bears in people's pools, and that's something we do have to take into consideration.
Yes, I mean, all of these issues need to be balanced, and that's part of sort of the growth outlook or change for a community. I think our topic, as Mark indicated, is kind of focused on the housing approach and angle. And the points that you bring up, Heather, need to be balanced as part of the zoning regs, as part of the POCD by others. And they'll have their own advocates as well.
Yeah.
So we got to find
The
that balance.
POCD is important because it includes conservation as well as development. So, we're talking about conserving those natural areas, and that's a component, but probably outside of our specific charge here.
And I agree with that. We have to be able to focus on what our mission is, what our call is. And there's other things that are important that we don't have the expertise, nor the time, nor the money. And there are other agencies within the town who will be working on that.
On the other hand, we did see some preferences expressed in the survey, indicating that, I could certainly read it that way, to Heather's point, that people would more like to see development occur in areas where infrastructure is already in place to support it, including along commercial corridors around transit nodes, as opposed to taking up green space, which would be natural habitat for wildlife and things of that nature. So instead of plowing under, green acres and making new subdivisions or new housing in areas that are previously undeveloped, maybe we should preserve that and concentrate development in areas where the infrastructure is already there to support it. So it is an element. You can certainly read it that way, at least in terms of some of the survey responses that we received to those questions.
Part of the comment section. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you very much. I'm going to stay and listen to the rest of your conversation. So thank you very much. And I'll have more stuff for you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. We'll move on to the Housing Trust Fund and Carla and Operation Hope. Mark, let me first ask, what's the balance in our trust fund as of today?
This is going to require some level of explanation, but we have raised in the Housing Trust Fund roughly $1.38 million since inception.
Excuse me, 1.38
38 million, correct.
Very good.
And we have currently a balance, according to the finance department, of roughly a little over $500,000. And the difference is that we've committed $800 some odd thousand in the purchase of Parkview Commons, which is supported by the authorization of a short-term note, but that is still hitting our balance sheet in terms of expense. So it's a liability that we ultimately will have to discharge because it's just short-term financing. It's not that we don't have that money available to commit, because we still do, but when I got the information for finance and asked her what the fund balance was, and she said it was $535,000, and I said, well, that's less than we had last month when I reported, so what is the difference? And that was once she went through the numbers with me, it made sense. So I hope you bear with me in terms of explaining it, but that's where we are currently.
So you're saying that we've got basically $1.4 million, and that 900 is restricted and 500 is available.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So with that lead in, what we've been hoping to do is to work with some good groups within the town to help increase housing options for our residents and increase the supply of affordable housing. We're looking for ideas and creative people. And so we invited one of the most creative people that we know, Carla, and we'd like to hear some thoughts from Carla.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me and for adjusting your time so that I could attend. Your normal meeting time is the exact same time that my board meets, and I've been unable to change that. So I appreciate it very much. And I also want to say thank you to members of the committee who were on the committee when we were attempting to put together a very creative opportunity to increase some affordable housing stock about 1.5 years ago, or right before COVID, I think it was. And we were excited about the possibility of trading 2 units that were offline for 7 units that would be actually productive, appropriate for the neighborhood, and would have housed a lot of people that really needed help. But anyway, we couldn't get through zoning, or we couldn't put the deal together properly. And thanks for bearing with us while we tried to do that. So, I'm finding the whole survey result thing very interesting. We distributed that widely too. We put it on Facebook. We sent it out to our email list of 6,000 or 8,000 people. We did our best to get that out there too. And I think the challenge is that the concept of affordable housing is so scary to people. And many neighborhoods are feeling the impact of some large developments that are making them uncomfortable. Operation Hope has always tried to provide housing options that didn't rock the boat as far as zoning, that was seemed to fit in the neighborhood or, improve the neighborhood that we operate in. We attempt to have the nicest property on the street or in the community. But I do think it might be time for us to start thinking outside of the box a little bit. And I know, Carrie talks a lot about pocket neighborhoods, and that's an interesting concept of creating environments within an environment that can be affordable, attractive, and housing of choice for people in need. So I think the idea of affordability, even the answer about low-income workers living in Fairfield, it's a little frightening to me to think that the community can't embrace people that they rely on a daily basis, and to see them all as other or frightening or shouldn't be our neighbor, is a challenge in my work, because my job is to help people assimilate back into the neighborhood and be successful. And so it's a little counterintuitive, I think. However, that being said, we're interested in, we're currently closing on our renovation on 4 units on Durrell Drive, which is near Ludlow Middle School, near Paper Mill Lane and Umpqua Road. And we purchased these 4 units from a contractor who had inherited them and was running them pretty poorly as rental housing, invested some money, considerable amount of money to bring them up to quality, and now have 4 units online that are actually worthy of the people who will reside in them. So I still think there's a lot that we could do to help you with your goal of creating some quality, affordable housing. And I think that there are ways around the negative effects and negative perspective on what 8-30G does to a community, and that there are ways to develop some good affordable housing to get us more quickly to the moratorium and to serve people who really need it. It's always shocking to me when I look at the affordable units that are sometimes created through the 8-30G, and I see that they're like, I could live there, right? And I don't really need that help. So, there are people, and Heather, you mentioned teachers, firemen, whatever, but it's true. The people that we rely on a daily basis, that cut our hair, that babysit our kids, that are integral to our community, are really shut out even by these projects that people are finding disruptive to their neighborhoods. So, I'm here to advocate for smarter, better ways to do this, and we are a creative organization. So that being said, I don't know what else you've been talking about in your meetings recently, but we'll be ready to start a new project soon. And I'm kind of curious to see where the committee's going and what you're thinking, because we don't want to be doing things outside of what you're interested in doing. We're looking to support your initiatives or your goals.
One of the things, if I may, one of the things that Operation Hope did so well, as Carla mentioned, in terms of integrating existing housing was, and we assisted with that, is the purchase acquisition of existing multifamily housing stock and the rehabilitation of it with deed restrictions in place. So basically, you're repurposing existing housing stock, bringing it up to code and ensuring that it is of high quality. And so for the most part, it exists, as does everything else in that neighborhood. It looks like it belongs in the neighborhood because you're essentially buying existing housing, renovating it, and then making it available for folks that need that type of housing with support services in place that Operation Hope provides. So there are a number of units in town, over 24, that fall into that category. We've kind of gotten away from it, partly because I think acquisition costs being what they are, housing costs being what they are, and some challenges in terms of raising monies to do that. But that to me was a very successful strategy that didn't disrupt neighborhoods, that did provide quality housing that met the needs of folks that were in need of permanent supportive housing. it would be good to get back to that, even though, again, there might not be that many opportunities, but we need, that was one of the things that animated that conversation that you mentioned, about a year and a half ago, looking at a multifamily unit in a different part of town where we might be able to, swing that. So I think that was I think it is a very good strategy, and hopefully one that we can get back to, but maybe not, as outside of the box as you were intimating. So.
I'll just add a couple of comments to that, Mark, that it costs $300,000 to build new construction apartments. And I'm pretty confident that Carla could bring in 2 or 3 units for that kind of price. That renovating, you've got embedded energy in an existing structure. And in my neighborhood, when housing comes up for sale, it gets knocked down and you lose that embedded energy, which was all the materials and time and effort to build it in the first place. And the price triples. And so you lose all around, and I think that if you look at our survey, there was a lot of support for structures that had 4 units or less, which is also in the wheelhouse of what Operation Hope had been doing. And, my guess is you could drive down the street that might have a couple of Operation Hope structures on it, and you wouldn't be able to pick out one from the other, that they fit in well with the community. So,
Right. An exception would be Jarvis Court, though, because our housing is a little bit nicer than everything else around it.
Oh, give me a chance. I'm working on it.
Challenge Mark a little bit. But I think that does demonstrate, however, thinking outside of the box and taking, 4 lots that, property was sort of obsolete, let's say, and turning it into 8 units of really quality housing, which is another opportunity to get a little more housing that's affordable, but to sort of bring up the value of the community around it. So, affordable housing is not always a negative thing, and that's a perfect showcase for what is positive about good quality affordable housing that sort of respects the tenant and therefore they respect the community. So.
Hi, Carla, it's Helene.
Hi.
So I love this idea that you did with Durrell Drive. Are those now rented to families since you renovated them, or?
So we had 2 tenants that were already in there that are not going anywhere. So we have 2, low-income households that are living in 2 of the units. We had unfortunately, we had a squatter in one of the units. And so during this eviction moratorium, there wasn't much we could do about that. So that person has vacated finally, and we're just in the process of finishing that last unit and then renting those 2 units. So there are some restrictions, as far as income restrictions, and because I received money from the Department of Housing, and there's a restriction on the amount of rent that we can charge, but we're looking forward to getting a small family or maybe 2 single people. They're 2-bedroom apartments, 2 single people to share rent over there, and make a dent in the need for affordable housing for both the family and for individuals. And they're nice. I mean, well, they're not great. And my ultimate goal would be to build something different there in time, something that would have more units and would be higher quality. But we've improved them considerably, and they are now nice. It's now a nice place to live.
So the history on that was that was town-owned land when those were built. I
Yeah,
kind of
Mark-
remember they've been built since I've lived here.
Yeah, it was
remember
back,
that.
I think it was Paul Adley was selectman at the time, and I think it was either town property or church property that was developed both for 3 units. There were 3 units of affordable home ownership and 4 units of rental housing, and the developer was not able to pay the contractor that was responsible for building the units, and ended up having to provide the units kind of as compensation to the contractor who built the units. And, I've spent the last probably 10 years trying to persuade Carla, much to her probably at this
Oh.
point, regret to take them off the hands of this individual. And, you know, and little did I know at the time how poorly they were being maintained or managed. But yeah, my thought was in terms of ensuring the long-term sustainability of the plan, who better to have long-term operational control than Operation Hope. So I've been trying to get this in place, and it took a while. And as soon as we, I think Carla is now finally returning my calls after this.
I will say no good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah, right.
And if
I
I,
know
I had
that.
only known, I would have maybe avoided it. But the good news is that, you know, we are going to deed restrict them. They will be affordable. They will remain affordable. So, you know, when you work with an organization whose goal is to provide quality, affordable housing, you are getting housing that's not going to be questionable about if it's going to remain affordable. It's going to remain affordable. That's what we care about. And yeah, so those units, Helene, were it was a great idea, and maybe in hindsight wasn't the best plan. But I can foresee in the future really doing some work on the topography there, because it's a little questionable too, and raising those buildings, putting up something really great, and making, you know, some good housing for some future families and individuals that would really respect the intent, kind of respect Jackie, because I always feel like I owe her a lot, and just put something there the town could be really proud of. You know, small, tasteful, appropriate for the neighborhood.
And so where does Operation Hope get the funds to do these kinds of projects? And where are you getting the money for the next project that you want to do?
So we're really just opportunists. So we're just looking for how we can put together the funding for the next project. In that particular case, the State Department of Housing had a little bit of money left over from a bond issue that they needed to put out there for affordable transit-oriented housing. And luckily that address is close to the bus line, the train, and work. So it fit the transit-oriented box. And we agreed to rent people at like 60% of AMI or whatever it was that they wanted us to do. And so we were able to obtain enough money to purchase the property from the previous owner, and we're given money for renovation. Of course, it's not quite enough money, but it was enough to get us through, you know, 75% of the renovation.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just lucky that we were, you know, we pay close attention to what's happening at the state level, especially to take advantage of whatever funding is available. So, and then a big piece of it is fundraising for us, like with the Jarvis Court project. We had a capital campaign. We raised money from all types of sources. We were able to obtain some mortgages that will be forgivable over time if we maintain it as affordable housing. We got a grant from the Federal Home Loan Bank. We put together a crazy quilt of funding in order to make that happen. But in the end, the results were awesome, and they're good for the community. So it's very hard. It's not smooth for us. We don't have like a big, you know, capital account with money that we can just use whenever we need to. And sometimes we miss opportunities because of that. But, you know, we do our best to leverage as much money as we can and use other people's money whenever possible, you know, in ways that help them meet their goals and help us meet our goals.
That's great. Thank you, Carla.
You're welcome. So,
Mark, can I have a question for Mark or Steve or whoever, really? When I think about this, and it seems to me with spending that much money, there must be some way of working to get 830G to incorporate these type of units and let them count for housing unit equivalency points. What would it take to start a campaign to do that?
Not sure I understand. What?
Well, why can't, like, we have a couple of thousand of these units across town, let's say, suppose we were rehabbing all of them and bringing.
Yeah, there's that to me is the fastest way by which we can achieve a moratorium. If we can work with groups such as Operation Hope to purchase and renovate and deed restrict existing housing stock.
Yeah.
it provided, and the only way you get a unit to count towards a moratorium is restricted for 40 years, a term of at least 40 years. And the only group that would reasonably do that
Is operation.
is a group like Operation Hope or
Right.
another nonprofit whose mission is to create affordable housing for the
Yeah.
long term. So, you know, I think that is probably the wisest course, especially, you know, again, if we're reasonably close to achieving sufficient points for moratorium, it would make sense to me to put some emphasis behind that, because again, the approach is sound such that it isn't disruptive to neighborhoods. You're using existing housing stock, you're repurposing it, you're upgrading the condition of it so that it also doesn't constitute a blight in the neighborhood. But you're also meeting the needs of folks that need the housing. And you're doing it with a group that you know is in it for the long haul, whose mission and purpose is to create affordable housing. So it's
Right.
not like they're going to be flipping it at year 41.
Right, and also the
something
fact
else.
that they provide supporting services is very important.
Right.
And I hope,
And the
Glenn, that you just.
issue has been, you know, Carla mentioned the fundraising element, and that all, you know, groups that do this, nonprofit groups that do this, it's usually they're cobbling together multiple funding sources with different funding
Yeah.
cycles.
Mhm.
And it takes time to do that. And you're putting, you know, 100,000 here, $2 million there, 500,000 over here, all to, there's only a couple ways to create affordable housing. You either have to subsidize it in some form or another. You're either subsidizing it through governmental assistance or providing land at no cost or below market, or you're creating through density such that the market units, that's what the case with 830G, the market rate units are basically subsidizing the low market rate units.
Right.
So, you know, I think that the approach here is it should be one of our strategies. And
Yeah.
it's just, and now we have another tool, which is the Housing Trust Fund. And I know Steve wants to probably ask, won't step on, but you know, how best can we use the Housing Trust Fund to move this, to help Operation Hope meet its goals?
That was my
Right?
question.
Is that what your question going to be?
So I guess a sort of an answer that answers a couple of questions is, you know, like Helene's question too about the funding. And so in the current budget cycle, state budget cycle, somehow, and I don't know if you're familiar with what happened, but everybody was sort of advocating for, you know, their various causes at the state level. And somehow the governor's office just left housing and homelessness off the table. And when the budget was put together, there was no continued funding, like, for example, like the CARES Act funding that was helping people stay housed. All of that money was just sort of forgotten about. So it was a huge misstep. There was no advocate in OPM in the governor's office to really advocate for our needs. So what happened was the normal funding that can be allocated for affordable housing development or affordable housing services or whatever were just forgotten about. So we are in the process, just like the way the town received recovery money, the state also received a lot of money, and that money hasn't been allocated yet. So now our service sector is out there trying to advocate with our elected officials and the people who run the government internally to remember that homelessness and housing are key components to recovery, and that they need to, you know, establish or reestablish funding line items for that work. If that happens, that's money that maybe we could leverage with some of your money to make something happen, and with fundraising, like a triangle of funding. If it doesn't happen, it just makes it that much harder, because there has to be will in the private sector to invest in this kind of activity. But that being said, we've been doing it for 30 years, and you know, we would continue to attempt to put together something that would work, you know, and we could talk about what that could look like, and even what a future plan could look like, because I think the Durrell Drive area, that little piece of land is a perfect place to do something more creative, in the future. But there's no, my goal was to just preserve those 4 units, because that's 4 units of affordable housing. So let's preserve them, get them online now, and then think about what a future project could look like there. And, we're open to ideas, but I think, Steve, to your question, it's going to make a difference if the state's going to put any money in the kitty for that. If they are, and I can access some of it, then I think we could talk about seriously putting something together. If not, perhaps some of the funding that you still have available could be used as a down payment, or maybe site acquisition for something, and we could fundraise to renovate and get it back online. But that's really, your committee has to decide what you think is best, and we're open to being a part of that. We would love to work with you. And we really tried. That Ardmore Street property was awesome. And, I hope that we come across an opportunity like that again.
So when you look for property, the property in Fairfield is finite. There's not an infinite amount that's available. And when you compete then against the private sector, you've got to be able to move quickly, and you've got to have some cash in hand.
Right.
And I'm hoping that we can help in that regard at some point, that we can help with some upfront money, either to do tests, architecturals, or down payment assistance, or just whatever it is to allow you to get control. And then you can work on the other parts of the capital stack.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I will say that when you apply for funding from the state, there's a lot of hurry up and wait. There's a lot of, your project has to be shovel ready, but then it takes them 2 years to actually release the money. So it's always a little bit cart before horse, horse before cart. It's a challenge, but it's not the first time that we've been in that situation. So yeah, I think that exactly what you're talking about, helping an organization be nimble to pounce on an opportunity when it arises, is really the most important thing, just to secure the property before somebody else goes after it. And then knowing that you're working with somebody who has a track record of providing affordable housing, quietly, professionally, in a way that is respectful of the tenants and the community, I think is important. So.
Does anybody have any other questions for
Catherine had a
Carla?
question, if you want to let Catherine ask her question.
Oh, please, yes.
Catherine, you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Thank you. I'll go in a more professional area than my kitchen where I was doing stuff. So Carla, nice to meet you. My name's Catherine, and I've worked with Carrie, and I've just been kind of a barfly in a lot of these meetings type things. I'm a big fan of ADUs, just people being able to control their, kind of how they're going to use their own house, scale of the same thing. So it really intrigues me, because a lot with the ADUs, and I don't know how this fits in, I find like, I don't like chasing something like 830G when we're really just finding, we would really just want to house people the way that they should be housed. And so, I would like to discuss some time with you or learn more if that would be something that you could help with your, helping people kind of convert their houses to ADUs. We just have a lot of older people who own their homes who are saying they're cost burdened. And if they could really create an accessory apartment, I sat on the Board of Assessment Appeals, and really even the number of people who had ADUs or 2-family homes, and what they didn't want to be the landlords. It was beyond them.
Right.
It's really hard to, they don't have the financial assets, but they certainly have the house.
Right. Well, being a landlord is, not for the faint of heart, right? It's really difficult. And so, and it's getting more difficult. So that's really intriguing. That's really an interesting idea, because especially if these are aging people who are thinking about, creating this opportunity, working with somebody like us, where there's a case manager that's visiting the tenant on a regular basis, keeping an eye on things, could be very helpful, I think, comforting in a lot of ways. In fact, they'd sort of be like a soft touch case manager probably for the owner as well, making sure that they're all right and that things are safe. And that could be a very interesting model. I hadn't really thought about our participation in that way, but we do a lot of work where we lease properties in our name and then sublease to our clients, as well as our own portfolio of property. So, we have some experience with something similar, but not exactly the same. And I think that's a very interesting way of getting more units online. And
When you're finished, I just
no,
want to,
I'm done.
okay. I attended a webinar today exactly on this particular subject. And as soon as I get the link to, so that for the webinar tomorrow, I will send information out to everybody who's interested in this. It's a group called Insight Formation, and they're advocating house sharing and doing it with this intermediary. That's really what's needed. So whether it's ADUs or something else, but where there's just such an oversupply of big houses with extra bedrooms and people who either need the money or the company or want to be living in some sort of community. It was about that, and I thought it was pretty good. And they run other seminars. This was a free one to get you to buy, their deep dive seminars, but it was worthwhile to see. And it might be something we need to look at as another strategy. So I'll send that out to Mark and Carla and Catherine.
Send it out to the group. Yeah.
Send
Everybody.
it out to everybody, yeah. Because it was pretty interesting.
And
Okay.
just, for the record, we do have 2 houses, they're multifamily houses where we have 3-bedroom units where we rent each bedroom to an individual and they share common space. It's not a group home, it's individual living, but it's for people who value having roommates and having, sort of, they become kind of like a family. It works really well with the men. It doesn't work as well with the women. There's more turnover in the women units. They're not thrilled to be communal livers, but the men bond really well, and that works out really well. So what it does is it creates affordability, it creates independence with, some relationship, and it's been pretty successful for us. We don't do a lot of it, but we do have a couple of units in town. And so we have some experience with that as well, with kind of, I guess they now call this shared housing, which is kind of an interesting term.
It's the Golden Girls.
It's golden. That's exactly what it is.
Loads of older women want to live in that situation. I mean, I see these types of requests all the time.
Yes, my friends, we all talk about it too. We're gonna all live together when we're older. So just how it's gonna be, so.
Yeah, it's the Golden Girls scenario, and it's amazing. So.
Right. So, and what we have right now, because our clients are aging, right? A lot of our supportive housing clients are aging, is we're kind of testing that model. It doesn't work with young women though, but it does work with older women, and it definitely works with older men. It's working out pretty well with the older men.
Really important.
Carla,
Carla,
do you have like set meetings that would be, that you do on Zoom, or do you have a monthly meeting or something that I could follow along and find out a little more about this? You're a whole lot more than the food pantry, apparently.
Right. People just don't, it's hard to really talk about everything we do. And so the food pantry is kind of universally understandable, but the rest of it is kind of complicated. I have a monthly board meeting. It's pretty boring for you all, but I've been thinking about having like some kind of open forum for people to just learn more about who we are. And maybe I could just set up some kind of a community Zoom meeting that people could jump in on, and we could talk. I could have Mark there too, and we could talk about what we've done, what we like to do, who we are. One thing we don't do is we don't put signs out in front of our properties. We don't out our properties. So a lot of times people are like, can I have a map? Can I have addresses? It's not something we really do. Although, there are deed restrictions filed that people could find, but we run staff-wise, we have a clinical meeting every Tuesday, but we talk a lot about the services side of the properties, and that would be, I couldn't really have you join that.
I would definitely, I was really inquiring about a public, not trying to out anything.
Yeah.
I understand that, there's certain client confidentiality and so forth. So,
But I
guess
do,
the quick answer is no, but if you were to ever have a panel or a forum, that would be pretty interesting.
the other thing I could suggest is, and most people don't know this, but most of the service providers across Fairfield County, like us, are all part of one continuum of care, which is called Opening Doors Fairfield County now. And there is an open meeting quarterly where all of us get together and talk about a lot of different things, funding that's coming into the community, any new projects that we're working on, any challenges that we have, any reporting and trends that we're seeing, in challenges or successes that we have. And that's open to the public. And it would be kind of cool for somebody related to this to be sitting on that in that group, just as an observer, and maybe ultimately even being voted on as a member. But those meetings are, they're on a calendar. I can get you the calendar.
If you send it out, I can share that with the group.
Thank you.
Yeah, so.
you.
But I think it would be good to host a forum later. I think
I think it
that
would,
would be great.
and it would.
That's part of our mission too, is to educate.
So, well, thank you, thank you for having me.
I got one last question for you before you go, which is, I think it was a couple years ago, we had talked about a co-op or a condominium down in Southport area. And I thought that it was going to be owned or managed, that individual unit, by Operation Hope.
Right.
And I just wanted to get your feeling, how do you feel about buying existing condominium units or co-op units in town as a way to pick off an affordable unit here and there, usually at a pretty good price?
Right. I think it's great. And I would just, there's, I think, at least one realtor in this group here. I just wouldn't want to tip the balance of having too many, causing a problem with the ratio of renters to owners in a condominium complex. But if that's not a problem, I think it's a great way of creating more affordable units. Definitely. I think, smart. And I wish that deal had gone through.
Yeah.
It would have been really nice to have an affordable unit in Southport in a solid complex. It would have been great. It just didn't, remember the timing and everything just didn't work out properly. We couldn't get zoning, which there was no problem. You don't need zoning for that, but the whole deal that we were putting together was complicated. So I think it's a good idea. And I think it is a smart way that the units are a little less expensive, and we're not big believers in building concentrated affordable neighborhoods, right? We want to just sort of spread that and not have it be so concentrated. So condo unit here and there is a perfect way to integrate people into the community seamlessly.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carla.
Thank you.
Looking forward to the next time we can work together on a project.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I'm so grateful. I wish I had more time to spend with all of you, because it's very exciting to talk to people who care about these issues. So I think I do have to create something. I'm going to figure that out.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next on the agenda, update on the Parkview Commons.
Very brief report, Mr. Chairman. We have closed on 3 of the 4 units that we have authorization to purchase. We have holdover tenants in 2 of the 3 units. We will have them through into next year in 1 case. The 4th unit we expect to close by the end of September. And we are still in conversations with 2 other property owners, which we kind of put on hold temporarily, because anytime we acquire property, we need to run the gauntlet of gaining the approvals of Board of Selectmen, Planning and Zoning, and RTM, and that's difficult to achieve in August. So we'll try to get everything in order so that we can proceed with the remaining acquisitions for approval in September. And as we do that, we're finalizing an RFP for a development partner, and hopefully that will go out concurrent with the final acquisition, and then move forward with that process.
So did you just say that you might have the opportunity to acquire more units than we had previously discussed?
No, it's the same. It's the same 6 units. We have acquired 3. We have authorization to purchase one more, and we just haven't scheduled the closing yet. So we're under contract, and that will close in September. And then we've been in conversations with 2 other property owners for some time, and we kind of put things on hold at the moment. I think we're going to resume our conversations and get to hopefully an agreed upon purchase price so that we can then move and present that to the boards in September.
The craziness in the marketplace has not really affected these units.
No, because these are all deed restricted properties, so they are subject to resale restrictions. It's based on a formula price. It is somewhat sensitive to market because people's expectations and perception is such. So we do need to get an appraisal done, which takes into account underlying market conditions. But at the same time, it is still subject to a formula. And so there's a cap in terms of what people can realize on resale.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mark? Seeing none. ADUs. Is there an update on the marketing efforts for the new ADU regulations?
Well,
Carrie and I had a conversation about it.
yeah, Carrie, yeah, I've had a conversation. Well, actually, I met with Jim. I didn't meet with Jim and Emmeline. I stopped in to see them today, and we had a brief conversation about that. And the first thing I said, what was happening with anybody applying? And they said, no, not too much anything yet, although there is a lot of interest, particularly in the Greenfield Hill area for the freestanding ADUs, and they expect that they will be receiving some applications for that. We talked about when to do this, and everybody's agreeing it should be sometime in the fall and probably sometime in October, but we didn't get any further than that because they also need to think about whether they're going to opt out of any of the 6107 provisions or whether we're just going to leave things the way they are. So there was some uncertainty about that. And then Mark sent me some links about what other communities were doing. These other communities being very well-funded cities, big places with some wonderful,
With nice planning departments.
really nice
Well-resourced planning departments. Yes.
yeah, the very not over-resourced, but planning departments that are beginning to think themselves like, all right, we want to see this happen. How do we make things happen? What do we have to give people in the community the tools to make it happen? Which is, of course, what all of us have been saying, helping people with the process, helping people with design, what are the standards, what do things look like? I looked at Los Angeles, I looked at something from Ontario. I've seen lots of others, particularly from California, where there's really a big push for ADUs. And the planning departments themselves are doing everything they can to make this happen within the parameters of what the regulations are. And Mark and I talked about that. We didn't come to any particular conclusion, but I think it's something that we do have to start doing. And as Mark and I also said earlier, people need to see things. They need to see what it can look like, how it's going to be. And, we're going to have to develop some funding sources to either do this on our own or use some of the Housing Trust Fund money, somehow work with Emmeline and Jim so that we're all on the same page. But we do need to get this material out there. The group I'm involved in when I'm not involved in this group, which is Fairfield Senior Advocates, which is represented by Herb tonight, and Catherine's a member of that. And I think a couple of other people in the meeting may have been, but we've started preparing some material. And we need to share it with planning and zoning and see who's going to do what at the meeting in October. I don't think much is going to happen before then because there are still a lot of moving parts.
There's really two pieces to this. One is we've discussed, and I shared with Carrie some links to some other written brochures or pamphlets that other communities have produced around the topic. So there's that piece. But then what we've discussed previously is doing a workshop with planning and zoning staff, providing kind of a how-to primer, answering questions as to the process and other requirements associated with kind of taking out, some of the mystery behind it so that people might feel more at ease or comfortable with doing ADUs. But there needs to be some written materials that we develop concurrent with that so that we can share that with the broader community. And, the stuff that we did receive or found online from other communities are really well done, but we don't have to go to that level of detail. We can kind of do things appropriately scaled for our community and the resources that we have that we can bring to bear. So
yes, we're certainly at a different.
It's a little intimidating when you see some of that stuff, but
Well, we should steal all their good ideas and then
Yeah.
further down to Fairfield.
I've got a copier, you know, we do well with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff online, really a lot of stuff online.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. Moratorium status, Mark?
I did send out a report. There's not a lot that has changed from month to month. You know, I will point out that we did have one project added to the list, which went through Code Enforcement Committee recently. And that is a proposed 26 unit residential development at 26 Beacon Square. It is a proposed 830G. It hasn't been submitted for a formal application. The property currently, if you're familiar with the site, there are multiple buildings on the site. Currently, it's multifamily. It's a fairly dense neighborhood. The developer has done other projects in the area, Campfield. And so, you know, they have done projects before in this area, but, you know, we're waiting to see the formal application. But that's the only new project. And then I did adjust the notation for 5545 Park Avenue to reflect the fact that, you know, when it was denied and since been resubmitted, it's been resubmitted as an 830G with 120 units instead of the 90 that was originally proposed.
All right, so we're at today at 300.
Hasn't changed. That part hasn't changed. It won't change until we get some of these projects across the finish line in terms of CO. And that's why, you know, to the point that Carla raised earlier in terms of that strategy, you know, you get moratorium points as units are built and occupied, you get a CO, or as they're newly deed restricted. So if you're taking existing housing stock and putting a deed restriction in place, provided it meets the criteria, meaning it's deed restricted for a period of not less than 40 years, you get credit for that immediately. So I think that should always remain one of our approaches in terms of meeting that threshold requirement.
Okay. Any other questions for Mark on this? All right, Mark, you've got a note about Ridgely Avenue?
Yeah, I did provide the application to Sherry. I haven't received the response. She kind of goes hot and cold. You know, I think you shared with me. I don't know if you share with other members of the committee. If other folks have taken a look at the property, it's a very dilapidated, you know, structure. It's overgrown, boarded up. Really a blight on the neighborhood. It's been vacant for some time. I know Carla, you know, has talked to the owner about the potential of her acquiring it, and yeah, there's a picture of it.
There it is. Yeah.
So it does need to be torn down. Unfortunately, it is in a Residence B zone, which does allow for a two-family to be built. But the underlying lot is undersized to support a two-family under current zoning. So
And I'm sorry, where is this house?
Ridgely Avenue is a dead-end street
Right behind Coles.
right behind, you know, former Kohl's.
Oh, okay, got it.
So
Got it. Thank you.
it wouldn't, you know, if we did an appropriately sized two-family there, it would not be out of character with the surrounding neighborhood, but there is this issue that it would be a non-conforming two-family lot. So, you know, one avenue might potentially be to request a variance on the basis of that it's being under contract to the town as affordable housing. And, you know, in that case, we would ask that both units be deed restricted as affordable rental units for a period of 40 years. And there might be an opt-out provision whereby the financing we provide to the owner to do the project would be essentially a declining balance loan. So if at the end of the 40 years, all the terms are satisfied, there would be no need to repay the money. We have the benefit of those deed restricted rental units for that period of time. If there was an early termination, they would owe the balance based on the amount of years left in the term. So that would be one way to deal with it. Again, there are a couple issues here. I'm waiting to see her development pro forma to see, again, I suspect if with both units are affordable, that there will be a gap, but we'll have to, we need to be able to document what that gap is and the need for a public subsidy or financing to support the project. And then secondly, we have to deal with the zoning issue. If the committee is of a mind to do that. Again, it would be doing a duplex where you would not ordinarily have the ability to do duplex because it's an undersized lot. The argument would be that we're doing it to further affordable housing development with both units being deed restricted. So those are the two policy questions. One is the zoning question. The second is the public support from a financing perspective.
So maybe we should set up a cup of coffee between Carla and Sherry. Maybe we can make a marriage here.
Yeah, I'd be more comfortable if it were, somebody like Operation Hope, because then I feel like it would be long-term, even beyond 40 years potentially. While the deed restriction would be 40 years, it likely would remain affordable beyond that. So,
yeah. And the zoning for this unit, is it residential still?
Yes, it is. It's Residence B.
Yeah.
And for that, you could do two family, but you need a 9,000 square foot lot, and it's not 9,000 square feet.
Sherry owns the property on Tunsis Hill.
She does. She doesn't really have any property to spare. Yeah. Because there's the laundromat there, and it pretty much is within, the other variance you may need is a rear yard setback, because it's right pretty much on the property line. And then SCAP owns the abutting property and is using it for cars.
All right, so it's really in the ball's in Sherry's court.
The ball is in Sherry's court. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think that's it, unless there's any new business. Members of the committee?
I think what I'll do is work with, I'll survey the committee members in terms of your availability during August, and then we'll figure out the best date to have a meeting, with Glenn. And I think it probably makes sense to keep the momentum with regard to the affordable housing plan, because the fall will be very busy if we're going to try to do intensive community engagement. So I think it makes sense to try to have a meeting in August if we can.
And we should talk about the calendar for September, October, November.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. That's it for tonight. So maybe we'll meet August 11th, or maybe it'll be delayed a week or so. Mark will let us know.
Okay.
All
Thank
right,
you.
everyone. I guess we're
Okay.
adjourned at
We're adjourned.
8:53 p.m.
We are.
Really?
Good, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark, great, and everyone, that great meeting.
Thanks.
Enjoy the rest of your summer.
So long.
Bye.